Welcome back to Sunrise. Well, let's get back to Mr. Nwankwo. You were speaking about that collation of results. Now, that seems to be, or that really is a bone of contention. It always is, has always been, really. Because what we've seen over time is, at the point where that collation of results happens, we see sometimes they ask journalists to leave, they ask everyone to leave, they collect results overnight, and then the next morning they announce, and you see people begin to dispute those results. Do you think that that is going to change this time, or it might just be the same thing? Can you hear me, Mr. Nwankwo?
I lost you there, but
okay.
I just had that question.
Yeah, let me just rephrase.
You can repeat.
I heard we were talking about collation of results. Now, that's it's always been a bone of contention for a while, because what we've seen is at some point where the results are being collated, when they ask journalists, party agents to leave, and then results are collated overnight, the next morning they're announced. What do you think is going to happen this time? Because even if you have all of those results, it is that one that they collate overnight that usually is announced.
I'm trying to get your last words, but I think you're referring to collation of results.
Yes.
And it has been a major problem with elections for quite a while, which is why there's been all of these conversations about introducing electronic transmission of results. With Anambra State, the farthest part in the state from Awka, which is a central coalition city, is about 2.5 hours in Nzam. There are a couple of other places, but the farthest beyond 2.5 hours is really 2.5 hours is not such a long distance from Awka, and I'm sure that if the collation happens at the polling unit, it should be possible, and I don't see why, if all parties have signed an election result, it should not be transmitted centrally, because the challenge usually is when you transmit from the polling unit to the ward level. There is always a problem. INEC is doing simultaneous accreditation and voting, this all starts by 8 a.m. So it should be possible that before the end of the early afternoon, voting should complete. And if results are transmitted from the polling units from that time, it should really be possible to have election results by the evening hours. So I think that there's an important need for INEC to understand how to abridge the process in terms of transmission time, because it's that lapse of time, it's that delay that enables collation to be happening in the middle of the night, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., that brings about all of the manipulations that we see. So we think that INEC needs to make a deliberate effort to try and get the collation completed as early as possible, so that the possibility of interference with that process or manipulation of it is really reduced.
Let's be hypothetical before we wrap up. Assuming there were going to be results collated at night, would you request, observers now, do you think it would be a good thing for them to request to be there? Should party agents be asked to leave? What should the ideal scenario be in the event that there will be collation of results at night?
Well, the ideal scenario is that all parties, all party agents, all observers follow the electoral process from the opening of poll until collation and announcement of results. And we hope that INEC allows this to happen. Usually INEC is open to it. The challenge becomes when you have manipulations and security services take sides. We hope that this does not happen, that the security services understand, and that's the point I make about transferring police officers away, because there's been lots of training, there's been lots of discussions involving police officers that have been on ground, and the understanding and training that is given is that the process is open at all times, that observers, that agents have reason and are required or indeed permitted by law to have access to the process at all times. An election is an open process. All stakeholders, INEC, the police, and all those involved in organizing elections need to understand that the credibility of an election is hinged on its openness, its transparency. That's what gives it credibility, and we hope that all stakeholders with respect to this election respect that.
One more thing, we do know that everyone cannot be pleased with everything, even with elections, particularly in this country. So what goes through the minds of observers like yourself when they say, well, yeah, from what we've seen about these elections, we think it was well done. And then you hear some politicians say, no way, we're contesting this election results, the outcome. It wasn't free and fair.
The observer is not interested in the outcome of the elections. It's not of interest to us who wins the election, and no observer should be working to see is a particular outcome, and that's why we observe the elections, and that's why we urge all stakeholders, INEC, the security services, not to come to an election with the purpose of seeing a particular outcome. And that's why when we actually issue the statements we issue on the elections, it's often before the election results are announced, which means that we're looking at the process, we're looking at what all the parties have done. And I must say that this particular election in Anambra State is very, very closely observed by observers. One, because we're looking towards 2019 to see what our next preparations have been. Two, because we have recently seen appointment of new resident electoral commissioners, and this would be the first election being organized since new resident electoral commissioners were appointed. Again, also that you are looking at how all of the parties, there are 37 parties running this election, so there's a huge interest in seeing how this contentious election, it's well contested, will manifest. So we are pleading with INEC to respect its promises that it has made to Nigerians to conduct free and fair election. We are especially pleading with the police authorities to note that this is a very, very well observed elections. Nigerian observers, international observers, this is perhaps the most widely observed elections of governorships in recent times. And no stakeholder should come to this election with a hidden agenda, with a pre-agenda to deliver a particular outcome, because the credibility of the institutions involved would be highly at stake. So the police should manage its image very well with this election, because if it is cited with respect to any failures, then its image will be seriously, seriously dented.
All right, Mr. Clement Nwankwo, convener, Civil Society Situation Room, we appreciate your thoughts this morning.